My brothers and sisters in Christ, today's gospel passage is one of the harshest in all of the gospels that Jesus directs towards his own disciples. Throughout the gospels, he's constantly confronted with the hardness of heart of the scribes and Pharisees. But in this case, this is a rare time where Jesus asks and implicitly accuses his own disciples of being hardened in heart. The episode is framed, and we need to keep in mind that just in the last few days, in our continuous reading, we've heard the second of the miraculous feeding. So not only did Jesus feed the 5,000, but then the second accounting of the feeding of 4,000. So twice, Jesus has done a miraculous multiplication of loaves and fishes, a miraculous feeding, a superabundance out of perceived scarcity. But now the disciples are in a boat and they realize that they've forgotten to bring bread along for the journey. And so Jesus, as they're squabbling over this, and you'd think they would realize at some point that when they're with Jesus, they need not worry about lack of bread. But nonetheless, he warns them, as he hears them debating this, that they should be warned or should be on guard against the leaven of the scribes and the Pharisees. Now, keep in mind that leaven as an additive is what causes bread to rise. And so a little amount of this leaven, in a sense, causes this great expansion, inflation, if you will, of bread. And so Jesus is speaking using this image of an additive. Be careful to avoid this being added in and what its impact can be. And in the hardness of heart, the disciples just assume he's talking about bread because they're obsessing about bread and their scarcity, their lack of having enough bread. And so this is what leaves Jesus to say, are you still do you still lack understanding? Are your hearts hardened? And proceeds to question them, like, did you see how much was left over when I fed the 5,000? How much was left over with the 4,000? And gives this line of questionings, and then that chilling last line, do you still not understand? And so when we look at this, and we can compare it in the backdrop of the first reading, as our reading of Genesis is skipped forward a couple chapters from, okay, now sin is running rampant already in the human race, and now we're seeing the consequences as God prepares to act in the time of Noah. But we've seen the backdrop of the nature of original sin, how the temptation formed, how Adam and Eve react, and how the relationships are disordered, how all harmony is disrupted once sin enters the picture. And so the leaven that Jesus speaks of is this leaven, this additive of doubt, skepticism, and the hardness of heart, the unwillingness to move. Nothing Jesus can say or do will move them. They're so hardened in their ways. And so Jesus is warning against allowing this spirit to enter, this leaven to come in, because if it does, then it expands to a great mess. It gives rise to, if you will, a polluted bread, if we continue with that image. And so it is when we root ourselves in an obsession about scarcity, that everything is scarce, we're in competition with one another, there's never enough, then in this attitude, we are always doubting God. We're doubting his abundance, we're doubting his intentions, whether God will provide, whether I'll have enough. I look at what I have, I'm always quick to dismiss the blessings I have, but I'll harp on the thing I think I'm lacking. And so this is the sinful spirit of constant scarcity with which gives rise to envy and pride and competition and the ways in which we sin against one another. But Jesus has been signaling through his miracles, especially the two feeding miracles, the superabundance of God's generosity. There's enough. God is enough. He is more than enough. God does not withhold, he provides. And yet, even in the face of this, they have Jesus in the boat and they perceive that they lack bread. They don't have enough. They're worried that they're going to be hungry. And yet they have the provider of the miraculous bed in the boat with them. And of course, this has ramifications for images of the Eucharist itself, as we know. But indeed, we all too often harp on the lack. We know Jesus tells us that faith just the size of a mustard seed can move mountains. Just that little mustard seed of faith. And in the same way, the adding in of this doubt, of this obsession with scarcity, to doubt God's generosity and providence, can pollute the whole batch, where we live a life of hardness of heart. And so Jesus is right to warn us against this, and we're invited to examine our own lives to see where our hearts are hardened, where we live lives of skepticism, of doubt, obsession of scarcity, of question, of suspicion, to allow this to be rooted out, this leaven not to pollute our lives, but that we may put our trust where it belongs, in God, who wishes to pour out every good gift for us. May God bless you all.